Oh, that was a Remy World Junkie. I really thought it was Suggs, but I've been wrong before, as we know. Hello everyone coming in today. Um, no pressure, Ramses. Oh my god. Okay. Yeah, so what are we here to talk about? Honestly, I've got some shit to say. I know I left you last week with like some pretty heavy stuff, and I don't want to, what is the word? Like, just take you on a little detour necessarily, but at the same time, I need to circle back about some stuff. I have been, what's the word? Listening. Yeah, I've been, what is that word? I've been listening to my original YouTube videos and being like, oh my God, I really served up some hella internet brain rot. And if you're not like used to parsing internet brain rot, then it just looks, well, honestly, terrifying, horrifying. Um, Something you might not want to get too involved with, which is super valid, but I figured I would come back and clarify some of that. And I want to start out just being like pretty honest about how that all came about in the first place, right? Like, and I know that I've told the story in bits and pieces throughout these podcasts, but now that we're like into season 4 and I'm feeling less what's the word? Vulnerable? Yeah, feeling less vulnerable and a bit more together. I'm gonna be real with you, and this is gonna sound horrific, but this is just kind of how I work. I've just never worked at this level before, and I hope I never have to do something like this again. But essentially, to make a long story short of the original YouTube videos and their preceding events, wow, yeah, try to summarize that one, Cozy. Um, well, yeah, as I've mentioned, I've been telling this kind of in piecemeal, but I have been, um, as you know, for the past 4 years, kind of pursuing my degree in psychology, completed last year. Very excited, woohoo. Um, and during that time, I was thinking really intensely about the extrematization of social identities, like, and this is partially because it was an ongoing like thesis project that I was working on, specifically extremism under conditions of isolation, which I never completed my thesis, and I'm not going to speak on it from an academic perspective because I just don't think that would be appropriate. But I was mentally and emotionally attempting to emulate the type of isolationism that I felt. Many of the like incel Nazi type ideology, mostly men, experience. And this, I know that just sounds absolutely harebrained. It's embarrassing to say it out loud. Like, it's so uncomfortable still to say, like, I was trying to mentally understand where they were by putting myself, in that headspace. And it's mostly a headspace of thinking yourself to be alone, or unworthy, or honestly having a lot of low self-esteem. There's a lot that goes into it, or like these were my presumptions essentially, and I was trying to understand the perspective from the inside in the hopes of making it easier to like dismantle it from the outside, because I've had success in doing that before in much smaller ways. Just, interpersonal stuff, empathy, basically, but I'd never tried to do it in like a big picture way, and I don't think or like, like groups, and I don't know that I ever would again. But I found myself like under this I don't know, just like severe political pressure, right? And I think we were all under it. So this was just kind of like how I was reacting to it. But I was like, as a techie person, as somebody like deep into cutting edge tech bro, your economy boy sort of like perspectives already, somebody who is like really familiar with these things as like being interested in economy and tech, just as a person voluntarily, and understanding that like these really rigid isolationist, individualistic, what's the other I word? Yeah, I don't know. But these headspaces are obviously problematic. Obviously, there's some overlap with the like Nazi misogyny, the racist misogyny, and I was trying to figure it out, and this is, I was basing like my confidence in doing this particular type of like mental exercise came from my like sure knowledge of how racism and sexism functions in a sort of more sociological or psychological way. And that confidence was from, some 12 years of post-secondary education in the humanities, just like a lot of different humanities. But I had this belief that I could like kind of like put myself in the prison mentally and then fight my way out of it because of who I was and because of how not me that was ultimately. Really dumb idea, honestly. I wouldn't recommend doing this. This super painful, not worth it. Didn't get enough out of it to ever make it worth it to damage yourself psychologically like this. I'm going to be recovering for a really long time. And it did exaggerate all my worst qualities as a person too, to try to like fill this isolation, like just honestly like this lonely headspace. I know I mentioned like having mouth loneliness, the food and eating related issues that kind of got exaggerated during this time, but there were also like, I don't know, purchasing problems. I got really used to buying things to make myself feel better. But one of the worst things that happened during this time, honestly, was deprioritizing the acknowledgement of my feelings. Like I just straight up stopped acknowledging my feelings because that was kind of like the only way to feel lonely for me. As a kid growing up, I had experienced normal loneliness, I think, and a lot of what I had, learned through that process was some certain amount of emotional resiliency, mostly just being with myself emotionally and like letting that be enough. And this process of like attempting to embody these headspaces that I like saw people getting sucked into, like normal people I would have like been friends with if they hadn't gone full fucking alt-right, like I watched this happen and it grieved me and I was like, what is this? Like, could we stop it? And me being like a little emo warrior was like, maybe I could try. And the worst thing was this habit of ignoring my emotionality as a person, just in general, like any emotion that I felt was secondarily important, no matter what it was. And if I allowed myself to examine my feelings at all, it was only for the purpose of moving forward in my goals, whatever those goals were. And no matter how noble the purpose or how idealistic my mindset in that sense was, ignoring your emotional state for any reason is really harmful. So this habit of ignoring my emotionality is the biggest like damage that I've taken from this experience, and it's gonna take me a long time to recover. I can tell it is, because the practice of sitting with my emotionality and my experiences as a human being emotionally was a really hard one to grow and to like do every day, all the time. And so the fact that I like essentially traded that for some perspective on what the headspace of the alt-right is, like I'm really dumbing it down here, but like essentially that, so not worth it. So not worth it. Oh my God. Like, on the one hand, I will never forget what that was like. And I'll always have that memory. And I feel like that might help me in the future if I get to have a fucking future. You know what I mean? Like, if my emotionality isn't present with me, am I even alive? Like, I can't get over like how awful that was. But this was, I'm trying to figure out how to put this. You know, in retrospect, trying to be as kind as possible, trying to be as like my own mentor as possible. Because whenever I look back at my actions, I try to do it with a mentor's perspective, like a loving mentor, somebody who cares about me, someone who wants me to succeed. Looking back in hindsight upon my own actions this way helps me to keep the positive learning mindset framework on things. But from a mentorship perspective, the desire to understand this phenomenon and to like hope to be able to help treat it was a completely understandable reaction for me specifically as somebody who had been in tech, interested in tech, following the political landscape, you know, aware of the economic environment, and having a passionate interest in the health and welfare of all people. You know, that's why my reading choices are always fiction. I love the human story. I love the human spirit. It's why my academic career has been focused in the liberal arts. It's why, despite my interest in all of these, I don't want to say male-coded. They have been, but it's changing, and I want to be accurate to the present now. But these archaic, well, not even archaic. Despite my passionate interest in politics, economy, and technology, I don't find meaning in those areas in the same way that I find meaning in the stories of people. The stories of people are what interest me, and those particular areas of people's ingenuity are fascinating examples of our intellect, our collective intellect, and our passions, and our hopes, and our dreams. And it had always been my presumption, just as a feeling, thinking creature, that this, I'm just going to call it the tech bro phenomenon, because I think people know what I mean when I say that, but the tech bro phenomenon being a sort of exuberant extension of a homogenized field, a homogenized and isolated field or population of people. And their suffering, like their sorrow, their loneliness, their bitterness. So the YouTube, back to the YouTube. So when I said, like I needed to be radicalized in the direction of my values, I was not joking. Like joining the pro-Palestine protest was intentionally me like saving my own life from this, I guess you could call it alt-right drift, as I explored psychological headspaces and themes of loneliness, isolation, ostracism, and its effects. And I mean, like, self-isolating in my mind, even from my own friends, or like the concept that they even care for me. Extreme, extreme incel-like behavior. I know. Stupid. That's how it felt. I mean, that's how it feels now. It feels like super stupid. At the time it felt appropriate. I was like, I could go in there and I could do it better than any of them and I could come back out of it perfectly fine, very cocky. I was like, I could go into that headspace and I could fight my way right back out and have no problem and then be able to like show them how to do it, those little bitches. And that was my like kind of headspace, and to some extent I wasn't wrong, but only like through the grace of God, I want to say, but through the grace of like never having actually been either assigned male at birth, socialized as a man, or in those places physically or mentally, like from a legitimate standpoint. I put myself in there, and to some extent I took myself back out, but I put myself into that isolationist headspace for years, and I mean years, and there were true combinations of like depression and other life factors that contributed to it feeling incredibly real, being incredibly real, and I'm still recovering from it. It was just one of the dumbest voluntary things I've ever done. But the YouTube was kind of like a debriefing for anyone who had been worried about me during that time, because like it wasn't not obvious that I was doing that, but also it wasn't easy to like interfere or try to help me either. I don't blame anybody who like wanted to try to help me out of that headspace, for being frustrated or for not being able to or any of that. Like I am the most stubborn person I've ever met, so I totally get like, I mean, you can't like help somebody who doesn't want to help themselves, and I really did not want to help myself, partially from self-loathing, partially from depression, partially from stubbornness, or like I wanted to help myself but only in a specific way and only my way and whatever. Like it was awful. It was fucking horrible. And so I pulled the plug last year on that entire thing, just from like just grief, just pure grief over everything that I had lost, everything about myself that I no longer was, not even having anything left in me but grief and pain and just like frustration, and I'm making it sound like I had all this control, but I really did not have a whole lot of control over this. Like I started out doing it with intention and like vim, and moxie and all those like cocky things I said before, but after a while it just became my reality. And if I hadn't had the social support, if I hadn't had actual therapy, if I hadn't had all of these other things to help me move away from it, I would have just been lost to that darkness. So last year, I finally, it was kind of weird. It was like I finally had the energy to do something bigger about the problem that had been growing, the problem of darkness that had been growing inside of me, which is like very dramatic, but actually quite real. And I also, in combination of like finally having the energy to do something about it, I did not necessarily have the foresight to do it in a way that wasn't destructive. or the wherewithal to do it in a way that wasn't destructive. And I mean self-destructive. So when I say I pulled the plug, I mean like I saw the opportunity in the Palestine protests in the sense that like I saw the protests and I knew logically that old me would have been right there, you know, like on the front lines without hesitation. And I felt current me being like, what's the point? Who cares? There they go again with caring about stuff. Like literally, I mean, that's really my first thought when I saw the protests or heard about protesting was, oh my God, why do those protesters just like, and this wasn't like an articulated thought, this was a feeling, you know, but it's the feeling, it's the voice of apathy. That's how I think of it anyway. To me, it's the voice of apathy, but it was saying like, oh my God, there they go again, like getting riled up and having feelings about stuff and caring about people on the other side of the world. How fucking dare them? And you know, like, because of who I am and who I've been for a really, really long time and who I've built myself to be, that thought was very immediately followed up with like, oh, you know, like, hell yeah, good for them, and also maybe we should join them. But my first thought was literally like, oh, there they go again, fucking caring, you know, like, how dare they? And when I followed that up, you know, like, my second me or whatever, like, the third voice in my head, you know, like the first 3 or 4 voices in your head are actually just you, and then the other ones might actually be somebody else, just dropping in to say hi, you never know. But yeah, I mean, that was mostly a joke, but the third voice, you know, saying, oh, we should join the Palestine protests was so weak, and like, I could feel, you know, she was saying it in a token way, like just saying the thing that I, the cozy, would say. Because, you know, I know like people have noticed I'm kind of branded in the sense of like I am the cozy, and cozy is her own brand of human, and she makes it that way. But that started out like not as a social thing. That started out as just like me, who I like for myself. That started out as like, this is the way that I'm choosing to construct who I am to myself, because it's almost like the way that speaking of yourself in third person is a helpful way to self-reflect. You just create this extra little bit of space within yourself in order to see yourself, and that helps you you know, moving through the world, because like knowing yourself is helpful. So like the cozy brand has been my way of like seeing myself internally before it was ever external. And the choice to make it external used to be like an intentional choice to have a through line of self between my internal and social constructs. And I loved that. That was both stable, genuine, real, beautiful. And obviously that took some fucking damage, trying to empathize with people who, you know, want other people to be enslaved to them or die. So, yeah, basically trying to empathize with monsters. Because, no, I'm not going to quote Stephen King and his inhuman place makes human monsters. Like, it's true, but no. Okay, I did it anyway. But it's just always true. Yeah, I have this really strong faith that, like, people are not monstrous. Something makes them monstrous. So if we can figure that out, we can heal more people. And I know, like, who made it your job, but, like, if it's not our job collectively, if we aren't like volunteering into the healing of one another in our work, in our interpersonal relations, in everything that we do, then, you know, whose job is it? Are you just gonna like wait for Guy Daddy to come down and save you, you know? Like, so yeah, seeing those Palestine protests like start popping off on like my campus and like watching myself be like, there they fucking go again, like that's my first thought that like bubbles from the depth of who I am in this moment. And my second thought being like, ooh, we should join them. And seeing with my third eye, I guess, how opposed, like literally diametrically opposed, those two thoughts were. I just felt this like severe dread and exhaustion. And I laid there on my couch like, fuck, like just, I just sat with that. I just sat with those two things being my first thing because like there's no way, and I know I've mentioned this before, but there's no way I would have gotten as far as I have in life if I hadn't been like passionately committed to liberation and to like the true construction of solidarity networks between oppressed peoples. It wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't, everything would have been different. And so, I gambled a lot of, I gambled everything. I gambled everything that I am on that like basic premise of like, this is me and I can embody the mentality of these people. I can try to empathize with monsters. I can try to like understand what shapes these like trends or groups or behaviors or people through the like like through living in the mental headspace of them as myself and like watching the way that I change and extremize and become different as I shift away from my core values or no longer embody my core values as strongly. This will help me like understand it better so that I can help do something about it. And largely because at the time, my mentality was like, well, I've got nothing better to do and I already have so much pain and bitterness. I might as well do something useful with it. Which like, no, that's not useful. That is not the thing that is useful to you as a person. And you can't put all the rest of society ahead of yourself in that way. That's just like evil. That's wrong in its own way. But, I didn't know that. All I knew was that I hurt and that I wanted to do something good with it. I wanted to do something useful with all of that hurt. So that's where I was coming from. And so I sat there laying on my couch after my friend like texted me about the protest, and I was like, is this really me? Am I really this like exhausted, apathetic, completely scraped clean, jaded ass old adult, like feeling ancient adult person going, there they go, caring about people again? Or am I the person who's like, oh, we should go? Because the person who goes, oh, we should go, is the person I know myself to be. That's the branded cozy. And the fact that that wasn't my first thought means there's a great deal of dissonance between, like, I guess in psychology, it's like the actual versus ideal self. There's like ought, actual, and ideal. But either way, I was used to having a fair amount of like synonymity between actual and ideal. Like not perfect, but like, a few centimeters away. And this was like, miles. There were miles between these two thoughts. Like, there they fucking go again. And like, oh, we should join them. Those are two very different thoughts. And the fact that they were both happening in one person, my third self, my observational self was looking at that going, what the fuck? And like, what sucked is that my observational self was like, I'm low on gas, like I don't know. I mean, I know what to do about it. The thing to do about it is to go to the protests and throw myself into it as hard as I can and as much as possible radicalize myself back in the direction of my own truly held, like heart-held values, and then cross my fingers and pray. That's what needs to be done. but I don't know if I have the gas. I don't know if I have the capacity to do it in a way that's going to work. And I definitely don't know if I can do it and not like ruin my whole life trying. But I was pretty much like, I don't want to live in the headspace of somebody who thinks students caring about genocide or people dying is exhausting. I don't want to live in or with the mentality of like, oh, there they go again, fucking caring about stuff. That like apathetic, like jaded perspective is that like specific thing is basically, to me, it's very much synonymous with being dead, because if you're not caring and if you're not appreciating others' care, why the fuck are you alive? Like, why are you doing anything? And that's not an encouragement to kill yourself. If you're struggling, please reach out. Suicide Hotline 999 in America. Please do not kill yourself. There's always hope. But, you know, like, as far as like my core values go, that kind of headspace isn't worth living in. And so I was like, well, fuck it. You know, like, we are going to radicalize ourselves in the direction of our values and see what we get. And so the YouTube, the coziescasts.old playlist, I think is what it is now, but the YouTube from last year, where I was like video logging this particular experience, was really like the debrief, both for me and for anybody who had been like watching and caring, so that we could like move on. Like, this is awful. And the pacing with which I decided to like try to re-radicalize towards my true values was breakneck pacing. And it was impossible. Once I started, it was impossible for it not to be that way, because it was kind of like a rubber band situation, you know, like it was just boinging back. And there was so much fallout, like so much of my life. You know, I didn't finish my master's thesis, which I think I otherwise would have done, and I don't regret it. I mean, I do regret it, but like, you know, I'd rather be embodying my values. And similar stuff, you know, I lost, or I left my job. I wish I hadn't. I really liked my job, but I felt very conflicted, in pursuing it, and part of it was not even conflict. It was just like, I left it before all this happened, because I had a completely different plan. I was going to finish my master's thesis and then hopefully start a lecturing position, you know, somewhere. And this interrupted. Like, it really, the protests interrupted everything, and I can't regret it, obviously. But I am like such a mess, and I've had such a hard time keeping a job since. You know, I've had a couple jobs since, trying to make ends meet, trying to limp along after this like absolutely radical destruction of my own life. And it's hard. Like, I'm struggling with attention, I'm struggling with depression, I'm struggling with a lot of things, and I have not been able so far to function in society as like a person. And I think that it makes sense, from a structural standpoint, from an institutional standpoint. These sorts of changes, these sorts of like extreme and swift changes in values, beliefs, or behaviors is obviously going to be punished by our institutions, because it creates a level of like uncertainty in the social fabric of our society, of our communities, that really isn't acceptable. Like, if everybody was that like quickly moving along the spectrum of values, beliefs, behaviors, it would be true chaos. Like it really would. Like you want to talk about chaos in a political sense that isn't, this discussion of what is actual anarchy. That swift shifts between values is real chaos. And so I needed to kind of give a summary of what's been going on in a way that like is both encompassing but also somewhat conclusionary, I hope. Like mostly, I'm not going to say like I'm back to fully embodying my true values because I don't think I really am, but I think I'm closer to just being able to be normal me, like not, yeah, yeah, just closer to being less pressurized, I suppose. To being capable of moving at like like a moderate pace. I was going to say normal pace, but I don't think our pacing in general is normal. I think it's sped up. But yeah, being able to move at a more moderate pace. And that was like once my life started falling apart, that became my new priority. Like not so much getting radicalized in the direction of my values, but like not becoming homeless, not, you know, dying, like really just not destroying myself too much. Trying to get to a place where I could slow down, where my pacing could be more moderate, and where I could work on these like deep internal things that have genuinely become broken and really wounded and damaged. But I'm like hoping in kind of like a healing way, like there's a difference in pain between like having a bone broken versus having a bone set. It's a subtle but important difference. One is healing, one is not. But yeah, I'm just hoping like we're turning a corner, and I can tell by the way that I'm able to summarize last year that we are turning a corner. So that at least is a I guess just like an improvement. But oh my god, if you ever feel like trying to empathize with monsters, just don't bother, okay? Just like we're already trying to deal with their absolutely wild amount of destruction. I don't think they need our empathy in that sense. Maybe interpersonally, like individually, as human beings, continuing to treat people as human beings, is probably really powerful. But in a group sense, in an ideology sense, not worth. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, so I guess, I mean, that's most of it. Do I have anything more to say? I think that pretty much gives you the background on like what was going on socially, what was going on mentally for me during the YouTube videos, and last year's dialogues, as I was trying to like work my way back into a healthy headspace, listening back on things. I could see areas where my own trauma, my own like, yeah, where my wounds were like reopened, at least partially for the purpose of examining them or re-examining them. I went really deeply into different aspects of rape culture that triggered, well, not triggered, but like, yeah, I went really deeply into discussion of rape culture in a way that like activated and sensitized different parts of my like mental headspace that are connected to experiences of rape culture, as well as my own understanding of it intellectually. And sometimes that additional layer of sensitivity or activation can skew perspective, and sometimes it can help clarify perspective. And I think that that was very evident in a variety of ways during those casts. And it was pretty fucking raw. And I guess I also like want to reassure people too that I'm not always living there. Like I'm not constantly living in some of those places. I was very, very present in them in the moment that I was speaking from them. But it also added a certain, like, in some spaces, it created confusion. You know, like, I don't know, when I was talking about grooming and transphobia, transmisogyny, when I was talking about people synonymizing pedophiles with transgenderism or homosexuality, there's more that I would love to talk about on that topic without doing it from a place of being highly activated about that topic. Because the silence from like the normies, like the heteronormative folk who technically don't have a fight in that, you know, don't have a horse in that race sort of thing, the silence from those people on that topic when like queer and transgender folk were accused of pedophilia, like that their proclivities were synonymous with pedophilia, their proclivities, their preferences, their humanity, their like personhood was synonymous with pedophilia. The silence from the heteronormative community on that topic was devastatingly loud, and it was incredibly painful. Like the lack of solidarity was incredibly isolating. The lack of defense or support was incredibly painful. And it made it really clear to me that like winning the right to marry or even the right to use the bathroom for your gender is not enough for like true equality, right? Like or true solidarity between peoples. That silence was pretty fucking loud, and it was really awful to listen to. I understand to some extent that it's born out of like fear of the unknown and history, really. The history of the suppression of queer diversity, essentially. Gender and sexuality diversity. Because heteronormativity again is like a more, well, like I would call it enforced because it's easier to control people when they're more homogenous, but not everything has to come from the tinfoil hat. But it has been historically suppressed. Queer diversity has been historically suppressed and repressed in our society. It's gone unacknowledged or trying to find a word for the violence of it. Intentionally, eradicated, like wherever it's found. Um, does not speak to the violence of it. But this, there's a history of it. And so the normies living in modern day, the normie heteronormatives living in modern day who have no understanding and no real knowledge of queer and like diversely queer perspective, including trans perspective, I like to attribute that silence to them just like not knowing. But empathy is free, and so there's a certain level to which I just can't completely forgive folk for that silence of like, you would equate me to a pedophile. Like, that's just so aberrant. And is it abhorrent? Yeah, I think it's abhorrent. I think I just like trees, so I try to make everything into a tree. Yeah, it's abhorrent. It's just awful. It's fucking awful, and it feels awful. Pedophiles are like the boogeymen of our living reality as humans. They're like the monsters who walk among us, and I've mentioned before in many spaces that this is a taboo that I think needs to be brought into the light in our society. Like, we need to talk about pedophilia. We need to like discuss the reality of these people who exist, I think, as like deeply traumatized individuals seeking innocence in non-innocent ways because they are trying to hide from the wounds, of their soul, basically. And that's essentially my stance, is that like these people are psychically wounded and requiring care, but nobody wants to provide care to predators, and especially not child predators. And who can blame them? Children are our future. Children are our most protected resources. They are our precious babies. And so, like, to imagine providing care to a child predator is pretty anathema. It's like, why would we care for them? We should just kill them and eradicate them and not allow them to continue. It's like, okay, but what if it's a human psychological disease that is going to just continue to crop up in our species until the factors, the underlying factors are treated? Or do you just keep killing the people or, sending them to jail? Which they don't even like end up in jail. There are more people in jail for nonviolent drug crime than there are for pedophilia or child sexual abuse, even though there are definitely more child sexual abusers out there. Well, maybe not more, but it's definitely the worst one, right? Right? Do you fucking agree with me? Yeah. Like, what are we doing about this? And this goes into my call for action for defunding the police, as in fund other things, as in, apply intelligent, data-driven, diversified care through public health policy, essentially, and create social support systems and rehabilitation programs designed to actually address the underlying systemic issues. Wild fucking crazy idea. But yeah, I do think pedophilia can be like healed on an individual level and in a societal level. And I'm pretty fucking committed to that, honestly. Partially out of just like outrage and offense that queer people could ever be treated synonymously with them, but partially because it has hurt so many people that I know and so many people that I love. It's so alive in the world. It is, it's our fathers, brothers, uncles, grandparents, It's so bad Blink-182 had to make a song about it, you know? When you fucked Grandpa, did he tell you that he loved you? Yeah, he fucking did. He did. It messed me up, you know? And it messed all of us up. Like, this is a generational problem. It's a societal-wide problem. It's an interpersonal problem. It lives at home with us. And I know most of the world isn't ready for this one, because, like, nobody's even ready for the first one, but I'm just going to go one step further. It's not just the men. Women just perpetrate their predictization differently. And I would say there's a diffused effect, but that stuff is sort of theoretical at this point. But sexism is real, folks. And so is the child predator that lives next door, you know? And it is a health issue that we should probably address as a community before it gets even more out of control. I do sometimes get discouraged knowing that I'm speaking into a world that still very much practices child marriages as though it is natural and right and perfectly acceptable. I get discouraged just thinking back on my own life and how acceptable people found me as a 15-year-old for their sexual interests. I get discouraged thinking about the stories of every last woman I know and their lives growing up. And the men I know, too, who were and are treated with what is definitely objectively sexual abuse that is normalized in our culture, today. So it's all of us. It's everywhere. And to those non-binary folk who do not live in the male-female spectrum, the intersectional ways it's affecting you are probably highly specific as well. And yeah, I guess that's obvious, but I'll put it out there into the literal, into the word. But at least a good part of my motivation for becoming more empathetic to these mostly young white men that I knew were on the cutting edge of like tech and economy knowledge and whatever in America, around the world, as far as and I include economy because it depends on if you had the money to have the most recent tech, right? So that's always in this sun never sets on the British Empire world, that's always the young white men. And so wanting to empathize with them in this sense of watching so many of them get sucked into alt-right, misogynistic, trans-misogynistic, racist, hateful mentalities, and wanting to be how can I help those guys? At least partially because helping them helps me, but partially because I know, I lived in these spheres. I had the technology. I was a non-male white woman, absurd, I know, who also had the money, or whose family had the money for me to have maybe not the most cutting edge technology, but some fucking tech. And I loved it. Like, I love tech. I worked in repair shops, I worked in call centers, I worked for all sorts of people, always almost in teams full of men, usually white men. But these were like my spheres, and so I already had like an intrinsic understanding of them as human beings and wanted to understand this phenomenon better. And at least part of that is because I know, or I knew, that they had the power to help me, and the motivation and the knowledge, the just raw fucking painful knowledge of the realities of the world, to actually help me address this public health crisis of pedophilia. I know. What a fucking, like, trip to imagine me pinning, my personal little warpath campaign against child sexual abuse on a bunch of almost Nazis, right? But this hope that I had been nursing for a long time wasn't born out of idle speculation or delusion. It was born out of my real living experiences, that these people could help, that they could be instrumental to massive change. And I have sure knowledge of many of their vehement dislike and hate towards child sexual abuse, and many of them having experienced it themselves, which is at least a part of why I rooted these discussions in about rape culture. Yeah, it's at least partially why I rooted these discussions about rape culture in the reality of how rape is used in the military. Rape is inherently about power. It's not about sex. It's about the desire to possess and use another. And we have a world full of young men, many of them white, sure, but all of the men in our world are generally socialized to be a possible warrior, right? In theory, a potential protector or guardian. And what a fucking shame to see them twisted in hate, in loneliness, and in isolation. So, hopefully that clears up anything you might still be wondering about after seeing the brain rot puke that occurred last year in my YouTube channel. If you have any further questions, please leave a comment. Otherwise, we will, as I say sometimes, catch you on the flip side. This is Microsoft Susan signing off.